on today's StoryBeat.
Michael Eisner, who is my mentor, said, if you want to have a happy life, be a mentor and have a mentor. And I would always find kids younger than me or older than me and try to help them along. It's a virtuous circle, which is an old Greek term, which is basically if you're working with a group of people and good things are happening, the good things will continue to happen until the virtuous circle breaks.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, David Paul Kirkpatrick, is the former production chief at Walt Disney Studios and also the former president of Paramount Pictures. He's worked on more than 200 feature films and their screenplays, including such global franchises as Indiana Jones and Star Trek. David has guided countless adaptations of books and plays to movies, including Forrest Gump, The Elephant Man, Ordinary People, and Terms of Endearment. He also won an Emmy and Golden Globe for his HBO production of Rasputin, Dark Servant of Destiny. David's authored several books, including The Address of Happiness, Breakfast in the Temple, and The Dog. I've read The Address of Happiness and can tell you it's a deeply moving story of two souls who repeatedly find one another through both time and space. I highly recommend The Address of Happiness to you. A believer in giving back, David wants to inspire and equip the writers of tomorrow. He believes fiction is an underutilized tool that can help build a better world. As such, he founded Story Summit, which has a mission to build community and connection among students and faculty while delivering world-class instruction in the art and craft of writing. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm deeply honored to have the extraordinarily multi-talented, highly influential writer and producer, David Paul Kirkpatrick, join me today. David, welcome to StoryBeat.
Oh, well, thank you, Steve. I'm really excited to be here, and I really appreciate all you're doing for the creative process.
Well, it's my great pleasure, believe me. So let's go back in time just a little bit in your history. Where did your interest in storytelling and writing first begin? How old were you when the showbiz bug sort of first bit you?
That's a good question. I would say when I was about 7 years old. I didn't know at the time, but I was asked to go to Pennsylvania. I was living in Massachusetts at the time,
Right.
to help my grandmother recover from a hip replacement. She had her eye on me as being a creative. So it was her idea more than others because she was a creative person and taught people like Shirley Jones and Perry Como, a vocal coach.
Right.
Anyway, she was very much into the theater, had done some work in Broadway when she was very young. And she was bedridden for several weeks after a hip replacement, and she bought me a big theater.
She bought you a theater?
She bought me a theater, which she put at the end of her bed. It was this big old puppet theater. And she got a lot of marionettes, and she insisted that every night at cocktail hour, I was to perform a show with the puppets. And then afterwards, probably after about 2 martinis, she would then give me notes.
Okay.
So every night I would have to create a new play and she would then review it. So I kind of got the bug from her because she laughed a lot and responded to my stupid jokes. And that's how I got started.
Well, I think that's probably the way a lot of people get started, with stupid jokes told to their relatives. What drew you then to the movie industry, to motion pictures?
Well, I have to say, and this is all part of process, Steve, I was very much a Disney kid because I followed the propaganda of the wonderful world of Disney on my black and white and then into the color with the wonderful world of color with Disney.
I remember it well.
And I got a little camera. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg once said to me the following: Had they not been born into the middle class at that time, they would never have been involved in the movie business
Why is that?
because they were able to afford cameras. And so at very early ages, monkeyed around with cameras and shot them on their bicycles and, in the backyard, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the same because I was able to put together enough money to buy a camera. And in the end, that led me to Walt Disney. The long and the short of it is, and I always find that these creative process stories are all about a very deep appreciation and compassion for the arts. I don't think that you can ever underestimate the power of connection between artist to artist, and particularly on working on story. But one day I was watching The Wonderful World of Disney, and Mr. Disney was not on screen. And then the next week he wasn't on the screen because he introduced stories every week.
Right.
So I asked my dad where he was, and he said, "Oh, Mr. Disney is sick." And I said, "Well, what could I do?" I didn't know at the time that he was actually dying in a hospital in Burbank of cancer. He was a smoker all his life, and it finally got to him. And I said, "Well, what could I do?" He said, "Well, you could make a little film and cheer him up." And so I got together with my brother and Barbara Nelson from next door, and we made a little video about, a dragon and a prince and, a princess. And in the end, the princess got the dragon as opposed to the prince. And it was about 2 minutes. I spliced it together, with the 8mm tape, et cetera, et cetera. My father said, "Well, how are you going to get it to Mr. Disney?" And I didn't know, I was like 10 years old. And he said, "Well, this is a very important thing, David. You need to connect with Mr. Disney's secretary." My dad was a steel salesman, actually, for Pittsburgh Steel. So I said, "Okay, how do I do that, Dad?" And, at the time there were long distance numbers and all that kind of stuff. And here I was in Ohio, and my dad dialed the number, and I got on with Barbara at Mr. Disney's office. It was that easy.
Wow.
And of course, there's this tiny little voice saying, "I have a little video that I made for Mr. Movie at that time,
Right.
for Mr. Disney." Barbara said, "Oh, well, how is it made?" I said, "Well, it's on 8mm." She said, "Well, there's a projector in the animation department, and I could get that projector and I could show that film to Mr. Disney."
Wow.
I mean, it was like, I don't know, it was the early 1960s, like 1962 or so.
Right.
And so she had me send it to her. My father taught me a very important lesson. He said, "Always, always remember everybody's name.
That's important.
Never forget it, because it's all about relationships. It's not about give me or get this or get that, et cetera, et cetera. It's about building a relationship and a friendship." So I built up a little friendship with Barbara, and I sent her a thank you card and the note to Mr. Disney. And 2 weeks later, I was riding my bike and stopped at the mailbox, and there was a letter from Mr. Walt Disney himself, handwritten,
Oh my goodness.
saying that he laughed, that the little present lifted his spirits, and that the world needed, he said the right thing. He said, "The world needs filmmakers like you." What did I know about filmmaking? And he said, and I'm starting a school soon. And if you ever want to apply, let them know that Mr. Disney sent you.
Wow.
Which was, in Walt's mind, he had this notion of building an art institute that was sort of equivalent to the Science Institute of Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Right.
So he called his California Institute of the Arts. So it's MIT versus California Institute of the Arts. Very, very different. In the end, he was a very practical guy. All he really was looking to do is to create animators who could fill his studio, because they were having a very hard time developing animators. In the end of the day, When I couldn't afford to go to California Institute of the Arts when it opened, I talked to the director of admissions, Donald Briggs, and he said, "Well, we have a letter in the file from Barbara, blah, blah, blah,
Wow.
and we've been instructed that you will come under the Walt Disney Foundation."
Oh my goodness.
So the interesting thing that all of that is really, I don't think any of it is, I don't believe in luck. I believe in synchronicity.
Hmm.
I believe that things happen for a reason. And in the end of the day, I packed up my bags and left Ohio and went to Los Angeles. And the interesting thing, after that letter, Walt Disney died 2 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is that just, Steve, the presence of understanding that life went on and that and that people would move on, that the arts would continue to be built was always been profound to me.
Hmm.
And I've always tried in my life to promote emerging people, when I worked in the studio system, etc., because of the lesson I learned from Walt Disney. And he was a smart guy.
Well, clearly, I mean, a genius. Obviously made a giant impression on you. I mean, how many people can say that they sent a little movie off to Walt Disney, he watched it and responded? That's probably pretty rare.
Yeah, but I don't know. What I do find is that people want to help people. And what I'm all about is trying to always demystify the process. It's not a scary process. They're not scary people in the industry or in publishing. They just want to create good product and continue working in their jobs and continue building their company or their library, etc.
My experience out there is that the people behind the desks want you to succeed because it will help them succeed.
Exactly.
And so it's always important that you look at the people on the other side of the desk, as I call it, because that's what it always was to me. I was never on your side of the desk as a studio operative. I was always a creative person on the other side, and it was always, I need to convince someone that what I'm selling them is worthy of their time, attention, and money. And so it's important that you realize that they do want you to succeed on the other side, that they're hoping that you'll come in and give them the greatest thing ever. That's how they make their living.
Right. They're not mean gatekeepers.
Right.
They're gatekeepers who want good product.
Of course. So you are clearly a master of many different disciplines, including being in business administration and so on. But do you think of yourself primarily as a storyteller?
Let me see, people call me a rainmaker.
Okay.
And I guess if you can create rain, then you create green stuff that creates nutrition. I would say that in the end of the day, I value story across the board
Hmm.
because story is the way humans communicate. So I would say that I'm a storyteller, but I'm also other things as well.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, obviously, you spent many years working within the studio system at the upper levels of the studio system. I don't think there are a whole lot of people that grow up dreaming of running a studio. I think they grow up dreaming of making a movie or being an actor or something like that. How did you find interest in it, and how did you even get into it? Through CalArts?
It was through Walt Disney
Through Walt Disney.
because I was a little kid and I would dream about working side by side with Walt Disney.
Okay.
And that was a real, he seemed like a really nice guy and funny and, an older guy, but would be wonderful to work with. And so it was my idea to work in that kind of space and help other people with their projects.
What would you say is the biggest difference between what a studio chief does or a president of Paramount? What is the difference between what they do and what a producer of the actual product does? How big a difference is there?
I think, Steve, it depends upon the person. Everybody runs their shop differently. I was trained by really good people at Paramount Pictures, and they were really centric towards the idea, toward the screenplay. And so, people like Michael Eisner, who went on to run Disney for 21 years, was president of Paramount. And so, for some reason or other, he cottoned to me because I was a pretty good writer of text and I would write his speeches for
Okay.
him. I was a young story editor, but said, "Hey, can you come in and let me spitball some ideas because I need to create something for the board. Can you write that for me?" And it was always such a experience of joy for me. Well, of course, there were a lot of pressures and tensions, etc., attendant with the studio operations, but it was also a very joyful experience because you saw things come from nothing and sort of manifest, before your eyes.
What were the biggest things that you did every day? Was it dealing with storytellers or was it dealing with production?
Well, in the early days, since I was story editor at Paramount, I dealt largely with story and writers and the development of their projects.
Right?
When I sort of advanced up the ladder in terms of that, I handled not only development but production. So in a regular day, you might have 2 projects in production and 30 projects in development. So like a good gardener, you were always checking in on everything and trying to help.
So you're saying you were actually dealing with 30 different properties all at the same time every day?
Yeah, but that's a small amount really. It's interesting in comparison. When I was president of Paramount, I had a budget of about $500 million.
Oh my, okay.
So that would cover everything from an Indiana Jones to Star Trek to a little old budget thing like Friday the 13th, which we made for like $2 million.
Right?
But meanwhile, Netflix last year had a production budget of, guess what it was, Steve?
I think it was over $1 billion, wasn't it?
It was $6.8 billion.
Oh my, wow. I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's huge. Yeah.
And streaming sort of revolutionized everything, but story is story. And, it still comes down to engaging people into it.
What do you think that streaming has done to the studio system? Has it hurt it in any way or has it helped it in some way?
I think it's a very disruptive piece that has revolutionized the business. And it is what it is. I can't say whether it's good or bad, but it's definitely happened.
It's definitely changed the entire culture and it's also changed the way money comes in and goes back out.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that ultimately that's going to make it difficult for artists to come up in the ranks? Or do you think in some ways, because they're producing so much more product, do you think that it's making it easier in some ways?
Steve, that's a constant for the last 100 years in terms of movies.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone complains how horrible it is. And yet every era produces some remarkable projects and people sustain their lives from it and buy homes and raise families, etc., as a result of it. It's always in change,
Mm-hmm.
and you can remember back when VHSs first came onto the landscape. It was going to destroy the business, and instead it actually enhanced the business.
And then DVDs did it again.
Yeah, absolutely. DVDs was a prime was a prime thing.
But now they've gotten rid of both of those other sources. Now they're just streaming. So it's changed all that where they don't have those secondary purchases of a sort.
Right. Oh yeah. The financials on it have changed remarkably, and I think talent has gotten hurt by the fact that you only have 1 or 2 revenue streams by which to participate in the product.
Mm-hmm. I think audiences have never had more access to all kinds of movies. I mean, back when you and I were kids, because we're roughly the same age, when we were kids, if you didn't see it in a theater, you had to wait 6 or 7 years to see it all cut up, maybe on NBC at night on a Sunday night, a movie, and you couldn't own it. You couldn't have it in your home. It wouldn't be there. Now you can see it on your phone. You can see it everywhere else. And yet, for whatever reason, people, especially young people, seem to know even less about the history of movies. Do you have a sense of why it's this massive explosion of the availability of movies has made people less aware of movies as a whole?
I don't think there's ever been, whether it be the 50s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, etc. I don't think there's ever been appropriate education for screen appreciation.
Hmm.
I just don't think that most people are very knowledgeable about film language, about the nature of a particular director. There's never been, I mean, I was raised when I went to Cal Arts, I was raised under film appreciation. So we looked at the classics from Truffaut to Bergman, to Fellini, etc., and we started to understand. But yeah, I think it's sad. But somebody said the most remarkable thing is that we always have to remember, certainly in terms of Hollywood, that it is an industry. It creates product. It delivers product,
Hmm.
and it does it very well in a lot of different systems. And Louis B. Mayer would be very proud of his studio. And it's a product-based business that has a lot of artists.
I tell people all the time that it is called show business, not show art.
Hmm.
They have to make a profit somehow. And if they can't, then the art part of it goes away. So it has to be a business in that sense. What would you say are the bigger lessons that you learned as someone in the system early on that have stuck with you to today?
I think one of the most important things is you can still make artful commerce. My mentor, Michael Eisner, said, "We don't make art for art's sake, but if art can make money, we will make it."
Nice.
And I've really carried that through all my life, um, because I think I look to try to, as best I can, on stories to try to appeal to the better angels and people, and not just deliver the simple primal gratification.
You want to have something that actually touches people in their heart.
And in their mind, and that lives on, and that might change them and grow them. And we humans are unique because we communicate through story. We're the only species that communicates through story, until of course AI came on.
Absolutely right.
Hmm.
It is how we talk to each other. Every day somebody says to you, "What happened to you today?" And you tell a story, and you have to understand how to tell that story. And then the great storytellers know how to take that and then make it mean something.
Absolutely.
So that leads me perfectly into the next thing I want to chat about, which is Story Summit. Story Summit's mission statement says it's to build community and connection among students and faculty while delivering world-class instruction in the art and craft of writing. So how do you achieve that at Story Summit?
I really do believe in the emerging writer. And I think it's becoming harder and harder sometimes for the emerging artist to step forward because of all the noise out there in the landscape. So, what we try to do, and what is different, I think, I'm certainly not promoting Story Summit here, but what I do know is that we work with working professionals who are our faculty, our guest speakers, etc. And those are our only instructors. We don't have anybody academic. We're not an academy. We're not a university. And what we try to do is guide not only in craft, and particularly in small groups where we can help people with their individual project. We're very project based. And it's a delightful thing for students to be able to sit around and talk to somebody like John Patrick Shanley, who won the Pulitzer Prize for Doubt and the Academy Award for Moonstruck, to
Hmm.
be able to sit down with him and talk through their material. And first of all, it's not a we did demystify the process.
How so? How did you demystify it?
I will say that I've noticed in my time how nervous and gobsmacked and how incommunicative people are when they come across celebrity.
That's for sure.
And I mean, literally freezing, not being able to talk, fainting, because they build up this kind of dreamscape of Hollywood and people and the dream factory, etc., which is completely delusional.
It is delusional.
And so to have a guy who stood up and accepted the Academy Award for Moonstruck in a small group talking about how he struggled through the latest play that he's working on, while he's also working with you on your project, there's just a wonderful thing that emerges. Michael Eisner, who is my mentor, said this, and this is again another takeaway. If you want to have a happy life, and he told that to me when I was 24 or so, when I was hired as story editor at Paramount. If you want to have a happy life, do this. Be a mentor and have a mentor. I said, well, I can't be a mentor. I don't know anything. I said, what do you mean? You're a story editor at Paramount Pictures. You know something, you got the job, didn't you? And he was a great mentor. He always took an extra time to teach through the process. And I would always find then kids younger than me or older than me, or just maybe not as experienced as me, and try to help them along, give them their first breaks. You know, a guy that Tab Murphy, who was nominated for Gorillas and Myths, was saying the other day, do you know that you hired me and I was working at the 7-Eleven? And I said, yeah, who cares? But you wrote really good material. And he said, yeah, and you kept me alive for like 5 years. Well, okay, but I didn't keep you alive. You kept yourself alive. And so he was kind of a mentee early on. I had a lot of mentees over time. What's so great about that, Steve, is that it's a virtuous circle. I believe in the virtuous circle, which is an old Greek term, which is basically if you're working with a group of people and good things are happening, the good things will continue to happen until the virtuous circle breaks. And I found over the years that, that I really try to work inside the virtuous circle with wherever I am, whether it be in a studio or working as a teacher in Story Summit.
Is that related to the concept of karma, where you put good karma into the world, good karma comes back? Is that a similar thing or different?
Well, it is different because you're actually aware of it's an intentional thing.
Mm-hmm.
We kick a lot of people out of our school because they're just mean. We don't need mean people. We don't need
the students.
Yeah, we just really want to work with people who want to advance the conversation and who want to advance each other. You learn a lot by critiquing somebody else's script.
Absolutely right.
But there is also a way to be constructive in critique, and that's an art in and of itself.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And to be destructive, like, God, this is a piece of crap, and forget about it. I mean, I've seen wonderful pieces of crap get Academy Awards, because they turned around, they became something else.
Well, that's the development process.
Yeah, for sure. Or even just perception. I mean, I worked on this picture called Witness, which starred Harrison Ford in his prime. He was a big star. He attached himself before we even had a director on. Do you know there was a guy who was involved with the script who had used to be working at Gunsmoke, an old TV show. And 35 major directors passed on Witness because they thought it was a piece of junk.
Wow.
And uninspired. That same script ended up winning the Academy Award because there was just this thing, these people are not movie writers. But Peter Weir came in and did a wonderful job in putting it together. But can you imagine a name like Harrison Ford, who was at the height of his power, and a Go picture being rejected by 35 directors?
Is that just arrogance or fear, or what does that usually amount to?
I think it's arrogance, and I think there is a sort of pecking order, and I think the bias towards old television, was not really lauded. or appreciated. I mean, I don't care whether or not you're 20 or 120. If you can write good copy and can move somebody, it's all about moving somebody, Steve. Here's the key. What happens in good entertainment is that the viewer travels. I learned this again from Michael Eisner and sound like a broken record, but he said, wonderful entertainment allows you to travel, and the ticket to traveling is by capturing the viewer's emotion.
Hmm.
So that's how you travel. You're caught up in a character, in a world, and suddenly, it's 2 hours later and, you've had an experience. And if you look at a script and are able to be engrossed in it, immersed in it, into another world, and the pages fly by, well, that might be something to consider when you're looking at making a movie.
What would you say then? And maybe that's it, maybe what you just said, but is that what makes a good story good? Is that it moves the reader or the viewer to feel something about another world that they don't know about, or maybe they learn more about?
Absolutely. That's the key. It's the important key, because if you're moving that viewer, you're probably more than likely going to be able to move a lot of other viewers as well,
Right.
because that writer is speaking a universal language.
Where does the concept of conflict fit into a good story? Is it critical matter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in the end, the person that we're rooting for has to survive and conquer the conflict. Otherwise, you just have a really nice tone poem, people washing windows and making breakfast and kicking down doors. But if there's no conflict, we can't be engaged, because we're not going to be emotionally involved with it, because we get involved because of the struggle. In the end, people want to be satisfied, and they also want a return to order. They want to see, out of the chaos of whatever they've been through, that there is order back in the world.
Some form of resolution.
Yeah. A resolution that is satisfying, not just and deserved.
That's the key word to me, is satisfying, isn't it?
It's not necessarily a happy ending.
Well, there's lots of really great movies that have not happy endings. Chinatown, The Godfather, there's lots of movies that don't have happy endings. But it is satisfying in some way. I think that's the key word. That was my training. That, and that we're in the visceral business, that we're in the guts business, that we try to affect people in their solar plexus, not in their heads. And without that, it's very hard to keep them engaged. Do you think that's true?
Oh, absolutely. And we also learn and are inspired by stories of conflict that might shed light on our lives in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody has an ordinary life. They might have a normal life in some cases, but I don't think anybody has an ordinary life.
And everybody is seeing the world through their own special perspective. They're not seeing it through your eyes or my eyes or anyone else's eyes, just their eyes. And so that's the perspective you're trying to get in their world somewhat.
For sure. For sure.
Where do you think most great storytelling inspirations come from? Do they come from virtually everywhere, or are there places that are better suited for great stories as far as inspiration goes?
I think all great stories come from some kind of personal connection.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be from childhood or personal experience, etc. You'll always find vestigial aspects, as you know, of your own life in anything that you write or create, etc. You can't help it. You're a human being.
That's right. And writers who are successful, I think, always are coming from somewhere in their own personal experience, even if they're writing about things that have nothing to do with their personal experience. Somebody had to write the movie Terminator, and I'm sure that they were never really, and they never met well, we're talking about James Cameron and Gillian Hurd, but they didn't meet an actual Terminator in order to write that movie.
Not that we know of.
Not that we know of. Well, I suppose it's possible.
It is with Jim Cameron.
that leads me then to your books, especially the one that I've read, which is The Address of Happiness. So you're a very gifted writer. That was a very easy, clean, great, emotional read. I was surprised by how the emotion at the end of the book really caught me off guard. I wasn't really expecting to go there. Tell the listeners what The Address of Happiness is about.
Well, let's see. I guess in the end, it's a simple story about love, and that love is really better served when souls who should find each other can find each other. It's got a kind of a mystical aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
At one time, it was being picked up by Thomas Nelson, a publisher, and it was a guy and a girl
Oh, really?
love story. And then, for whatever reason, we didn't see eye to eye, and I gave back the advance, etc. And I just worked on it myself. And a little company ultimately published it, who were friends of mine, but they felt that we should make it a same-sex love story. And I said, okay, fine. And it really opened up my eyes to better understand that love is love. I'm a lefty, and I do believe that everybody has a right to love the way they should. That's not the message of the story. The message of the story is that love is out there for you, and it is a divine matter.
Well, the book has, without at all talking about it, it has a little bit of a religious overtone to it.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't ever talk about religion. It's not couched that way at all. But the fact that it's souls and the fact that they find one another again, that has a little bit of a religious overtone to it. Was that your intent?
Well, when you're getting with the divine, you can call it what you want.
Sure.
I'm not a big believer in organized religion. I believe more in the sort of solo spiritual journey. But a guy named Stephen, can't even think of his last name now. He'll kill me because he changed his name. The guy who produced Somewhere in Time optioned the Address for Happiness, and he was old, later in life, and he wasn't able to set it up, and he had some personal tragedies in life that sort of kept him from it. But it's sort of in that mode, and there's a little supernatural in Somewhere in Time as there is in The Address of Happiness.
Definitely.
But thank you for reading it, and appreciate that.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. What led you to sit down and write that story? I mean, where did it come from?
I don't know.
It just came out of nowhere.
I think that there's a lot of conversation about where it comes from, that there are ideas out there, and that if you don't reach up and grab them, some other creative is going to do it. Because, you're always surprised about similar projects that might be in the works.
Happens all the time.
Yeah. And I think that part of it, there's this old concept from the Greek, which is the concept of a god named genius. And genius will flit around, according to Aristotle, will flit around and sit on your shoulder and whisper to you, and then he flits off. And you've got to capture that genius. Today, everybody's a genius. Steve Jobs is a genius. Elon Musk is a genius. Et cetera, et cetera. But there's still a lot to be said about, I think, friendly forces out there. You could call them, guides, angels, fairies, God, whatever that may be. But I do think I don't think the universe is against us. I think the universe is rooting for us.
Some people think of it as the ideas are in the ether and that you go fishing and sometimes you can catch a fish because they're just there. And sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 people catch fish in the same pond, and that's where you get these similar things that happen. You can see that in science, you can see it in literature and art and so on, where things happen in a similar period and different people are developing things that are of a similar kind. How long did it take you to develop the story? How long did it take you to write it?
Oh, I don't know. I kind of did it as a hobby, Steve, and Probably took me off and on a couple of months.
Oh, a couple of months, that's all.
Yeah,
So it wasn't something that you labored over for years and years.
no.
And did you draft it in how many drafts? 1, 2, 3?
Gosh, I don't know. I just kept sort of going back to it, fussing with it. So I'd look at a section and fuss over it, etc. But I was always very impressed with Eric Siegel's love story
Okay.
because you could read that in 2 hours and you'd cry. So what I wanted to do, I guess my inspiration was really love story because I wanted to create an emotional experience that somebody could read in less than 2 hours and cry. I'm a big crier. I love to cry. And when I cry, in the old days when I would cry reading a script, I would buy that script because I knew if I cried, others will cry.
Well, if it got you where it got you, then it really meant something to you.
Right.
Total sidebar, but of course, the famous line from Love Story is, love means never having to say you're sorry. And then my favorite comedy of all time, is What's Up, Doc? And because it's Ryan O'Neal, we get that reflection back at the end of that movie that's absolutely hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about. Yes, I don't want to spoil it for the listeners. You should check out both of those movies, Love Story and What's Up, Doc. But you'll see that if you watch Love Story first, it'll have some meaning at the very end of What's Up, Doc. So what would you say was the biggest challenge then in writing Address of Happiness? It doesn't sound like you spent a lot of agony over it.
No, I don't know that I had any real challenge with it. It sort of kind of wrote itself in a way. And I think when you are able to write in the zone, and I always say, get in the zone, and there are ways to get into the zone for writers and creatives, etc.
Give us a clue. That's a good one. Give us a clue how to get into the zone, how you do it.
Well, you have to prep a bit. The way you prep is that you have to catch yourself off guard. You've got to have a couple of very simple things because we writers don't want to sit down. I mean, Elizabeth Gilbert has talked about it really well in a brilliant TED Talk about just getting in the seat. And Steve Pressfield, who wrote Art of War, wrote a whole book about it. It's really hard to get into your seat. So in this, and generally, once you do, you're pleasured by the fact that you get into a zone. But generally, you have to have a little bit of ritual. So it might be 5 or 6 things. You wash your hands, you sharpen your pencil, you close the door into your office, you clean off your screen for your computer, you say a prayer, you look for inspiration, and then suddenly you're at your seat and you're working. The other thing, which I think is very important for writers, certainly in terms of getting into the zone, and Dan Brown said this, as does so many writers, which is set the table the day before. And what does set the table mean? It basically means have a little bit of a plan, maybe 3 little things that you want to accomplish that next day that are before you, so you know where you're going to go. And that allows you the night before to allow your subconscious to work on those 3 or 4 little items so that when you come to the zone, because the zone is all about letting yourself go to the subconscious. Sometimes in zone, you don't even know you're working on it, right?
Oh, of course. Hours go by.
Yeah. And that's because you trust the process enough. Trusting the process is pro. It's not amateur. When you trust the process, you can get results.
Absolutely right.
And and you just got to figure out a way to make it easy for yourself to sit down in that darn chair.
Well, there are some writers that say that they like to end the day in the middle of a sentence, not finish it, so that when they start the next day, they're in the middle already.
Yep. That's the same kind of concept of setting the table in a way.
The other thing that I was trained was that the way that a writer becomes successful, the formula for it is ass liberally applied to chair. That was what I was always taught.
I know.
But your way of getting there is really wonderful because it gets you to it.
But when we would be on production deadlines and we would have to be shooting like the next day,
Right.
we would put our writers under surveillance. I mean, literally, we would put them in hotel rooms and watch over them that they didn't go out, they didn't go drinking, they didn't go do this or they do that. And those pages in the next morning were there.
So was there a guard outside the door?
Me. When I was over at Paramount, I said, we really rely on writers. I was thinking, I was walking up in the dressing room building, which is where the stars used to go. And on the third floor, it's really pretty empty. And I'd like to be able to manage that third floor by turning it into a writer's hall. And go, why not some other place? And why do we need writers on the lot? And they go overhead, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, because we can't manage that. And because they had showers and convertible sofas in their offices. So I could move them and keep them there for 2 or 3 weeks while they did the rewrite. I swear. And I didn't do it with any level of attempt to control. I did it to attempt to manage, to get people to a place where they weren't driven by fear. They were instead driven by order and the need to finish. And we were very successful. We had about 10 different writers working up, in the third floor and what now is known as the Writers' Hall still at Paramount. And they still have the showers in the beds.
Wasn't it William Faulkner who was working at one of the studios and he said to the person above him, I'd really like to go and work at home. And they said, fine. He went back to Mississippi or Alabama, wherever, Mississippi, I think it was. He went back home. That was, and so you were saying that it becomes a little bit more of, I don't want to use the word, but the word that comes to mind is factory, the sense that there are people in a place actually working regular or irregular hours, but not off wandering around, which a writer will easily do.
You can't be a fascist about it because everybody is different.
Right.
But there are certain peoples who need a bit of control. I remember when we were about to face a Writers Guild strike, and Ned Tannen, who was then the president of the studio, and myself and Lindsay Duran sat in a room with John Hughes, who we had an overall deal with. And we were about to come into a Writers Guild strike and on Monday. But John was very prolific and worked very quickly.
Yes.
Ned said, you're going to have to accomplish the unaccomplishable. You need to write a script in 3 days. And you need to deliver it by midnight on Sunday night. Because the writer's strike starts on Monday. And as long as it's turned in, by then, we can officially greenlight it so that any changes that are done after that script are able to be done under the Writers Guild because you're prepping a movie now. In that particular time, you could write on a movie as a Writers Guild member.
Right.
So Ned said, what are you going to write? Presuming that he had an idea. He always has ideas. He said, I have this idea about a kid who plays hooky. And so Ned is like, David, you need to get over to the fax machine at Paramount. And, it's like 11 o'clock at night. And make sure that fax comes in every page of it before midnight. And then you've got to read it as it comes off the fax machine and tell me that we can greenlight this movie.
I know what movie this is going to be.
You know what it is, and guess what it is. You can say it.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Exactly. It was 190 pages.
190 pages?
Well, it was a draft, so he just exploded over it. He just continued to, he wrote it long.
Wow, that's really long.
Yeah, that's really long.
Especially for a comedy.
Yeah, but it was a draft in 48 hours. But here's the point. I said, John, we have a bungalow for you reserved at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
He said, oh, no, I'm not able to do that. He said, I have to write with my wife in the house. He said, I don't know why, but unless I can feel the comfort and the warmth of being with my family, I can't do it. Now, I've worked with John on a couple of, and maybe he was jobbing us or not, I don't know. And unfortunately, he passed away several years ago at quite an early age. But Ned said, well, who are we to argue with how you need to work, John? So go on home and just, deliver that by Sunday because you'll have another go movie. And I don't know, I think 10 or 15 weeks later, we were shooting it.
That's quite amazing. Well, he, as you pointed out, he was extraordinarily prolific.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody can do that. Not everybody has all that stuff in their head that they can just pour out. He clearly did. I have been having just the most marvelous conversation for just shy of an hour with David Paul Kirkpatrick, and we're going to wind the show down a little bit now. And I'm just wondering, in all of your many, many experiences, you've already told us some spectacular stories, but I'm wondering if you can share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, or just plain funny. More than you've already told us.
Well, sure. Well, we were making a movie called 48 Hours.
Oh, yes.
And we were doing it with Richard Pryor and Burt Reynolds,
Okay.
two top stars.
Right.
And the racial issue was important for any number of reasons. Both Burt and Richard had to bow out. So we had to go with the B team. There was a kid on a show called Saturday Night Live that had exploded named Eddie Murphy. He was from New Jersey. He had never been on a plane. And I tell this story because it allows us all to understand the power of talent and also our own innocence and our own naivete. We were making the movie, very low budget, like $7 million. We made a deal with Eddie to co-star in the movie opposite Nick Nolte. And I don't remember exactly why, but I picked him up in my Toyota at the airport.
Okay.
Because I believed that he had never been on an airplane. He had never been to LA. And he came out like one of these kind of country bumpkins, with his T-shirt on and his sweats on and looking around. And there I was. And I was at the curb and we had to move quickly. And I picked up his suitcase. And it was like a cardboard suitcase, one of the, it's just cheap things. And it was like so light. And then I shook it. And I put it in the trunk of the Toyota and we drove away. I said, what's in that suitcase? I said, there's nothing in there. He said, oh, no. He said, I've got three things. He said, I've got a change of underwear. I've got a jump rope and I've got a playing cards. And I said, okay. I said, you didn't bring any clothes? He said, well, I was told by a lot of people who had been on film set that I could basically take the clothes home from the show, which was fine with us. Who cares, how the price of jeans, and the price of T-shirts. And I said, well, what about the jump rope? He said, well, I understand that you don't get a lot of exercise on a movie set. So I brought a jump rope so I could jump rope, in between what they call takes, I guess. Yeah, I know. And he said, and I brought playing cards because I could have fun playing some cards because I'm pretty good at poker. And then, we previewed 48 Hours. We got good reaction. The picture went on to become successful. In those days, we had a 3-picture deal with people if we had discovered them. And so therefore we would have the benefit if we wanted to use them in other movies. So we then put them in Trading Places. And then his third picture became Beverly Hills Cop. I'm actually turning into a second story, which is Eddie was poking around. We made an overall deal with him. We extended it to another couple pictures, and he became a big draw.
Big.
But he had only done 2 pictures. And I'll wrap up the story quickly. We had a picture that was supposed to star Sly Stallone called Beverly Hills Cop. It was a comedy. It was all wrong that we'd even cast Stallone in it. And Stallone had done a rewrite on this comedy and turned it into an action thriller, which he even renamed the character Cobra. and we couldn't end up making it. We had no star, and we were a couple weeks away from shooting. And Eddie was in my office, like, what am I going to do? He said, here's the script. Why don't you read this and don't tell anybody? And let me know if you like it. And I told him the premise, blah, 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 blah. So 2 hours later, I get this call. David, get into my office. This was Jeff Katzenberg, who was president of production
Right.
at Paramount at the time. He said, I just got off the phone with young Eddie Murphy, who tells me that he would love to star in Beverly Hills Cop. I said, what? And first of all, I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me first? And why did he even go to Jeff? So I said, did you give it to him? I said, you bet I gave it to him. And I'll tell you, that's one fine idea. And he said, well, you may think it's a fine idea, but I am president of production and you are fucking fired. And he said, so get off the lot. Now, I had trained under Michael. I had trained under Jeffrey. I was really indispensable. But I picked up my plants and my filing cabinets and stuff, and I went down to the beach, ready to go in for unemployment. And 2 days later, Michael Eisner called me. He said, I don't care what Jeffrey says. That's a great idea. Eddie Murphy is now starring in Beverly Hills Cop. So would you please come back? I said, well, I'll come back if I get a raise. And so we went through that process. But there's 2 points of the story. One is you've got to always be fresh with the experience that you're coming into. Like Eddie comes in with a jump rope and some playing cards, but is ready to take it on. And the second thing is you really have to consider the creative aspects of other pieces of the film, which is casting and the zeitgeist and making something. I'll tell you, I didn't think the movie was that good in the end. It made a fortune. It was the #1 picture of the year. He became a huge star.
Huge.
But I'll tell you, Eddie never forgot his roots and never forgot me. And we made 9 pictures together at Paramount.
My goodness. I'm not sure if that will serve as the last question I have for you, which is about a great piece of advice, but maybe you do. Do you have a single solid piece of advice that you like to give to people that are starting out, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to the next level?
I do, and it's a very essential piece. And we forget the power of our own words, and we forget the power of a physical letter. I have been telling people all my life that if you want to get involved in the business, who are your heroes? Write to your heroes that you want to apprentice under or learn from or have a meeting with. And I have seen everyone from Quentin Tarantino to Marty Scorsese to Steven Spielberg hiring these people, getting to know them, etc., based on that letter. I myself wouldn't have had my career had it not been a letter and a film to Walt Disney. And by the way, it's not about a want. It is about a want, but it's not about a get. I just so want to work in the business, etc. The key in all of this, Steve, is you've got to convince the reader in the first 2 lines that you were authentic and legitimate and you were speaking specifically to their own talent. You've got to say something that moved you in a film, that touch of hand, a little brief moment, a close-up, or whatever that might be, that would say to the reader of that, they get me, they understand me, and it would be worth my while to take 20 minutes and meet them. I mean, a kid who reached out to Quentin Tarantino because he loved their sound, Quentin had a meeting with, and the kid 3 years ago won the Academy Award for sound on the Hollywood movie that Quentin did.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, right. So people want to help other people, but they need to know that what they're going to do, that there's going to be a relationship and it's going to be meaningful and it's going to be fun, that they could help that person.
Well, this is just incredible advice, because one of the things I think we've lost today is the art of writing letters. And so what you're saying is sit down and think about how to write a really potent smart, terse, clear, and not an ass-kissing letter, but a letter that says something sincere from the heart. This is something that has been lost as an art, is to be able to communicate that way in writing. And I hope people listen to this and get from it that they need to sit down and think about how to do that.
Right, because it can make all the difference.
I can see that it absolutely would. David Paul Kirkpatrick, this has been an absolutely spectacular hour plus on StoryBeat, and I cannot thank you enough for this wonderful hour of time, energy, and wisdom from you.
Oh, thank you. You've been a delightful host, and I loved it. And keep on doing what you're doing, because I know it's helping a lot of people.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.